Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we believe mental illness can be temporary and transformative. Stay tuned for innovative, effective tools from experts in the field of mental health. Hosted by Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist. This podcast aims to change the narrative around mental illness. Move from a place of fear to a place of hope and solutions. Here on Your Mind.
My next guest is Beatrice Birch. Beatrice is the Inner Fire founder and board president. She has worked as a Hashgua artistic therapist for more than 30 years in integrative clinics and inspiring initiatives in England, Holland, and the USA, where the whole human being of body, soul, and spirit was recognized and embraced in the healing process. She has lectured and taught as far afield as Taiwan. Her passionate belief in both the creative spirit within everyone and the importance of choice, along with her love and interest in the human being, has taken her also into prisons where she has volunteered for many years, offering soul support through alternatives to violence work and watercolor painting. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
I'm very glad to be here, Timothy. Yeah.
It's a pleasure to meet with you face to face. I know we've talked in the past. By way of getting started, just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this field.
Well, I can say I am American, but I spent 25 years in Europe where I was working in alternative clinics, bringing what's referred to as Hauschka artistic therapy, which is a 3-year full-time medically based training, but training from a different angle, a training which recognizes the human being as having a body, a soul, and a spirit. So it's looking at the human being not as just genes and hereditary forces and DNA and all that, certainly not as a machine, but as someone who has a body, who has an etheric, a life force within them, who has an astral body, which is the seat of our emotions, sympathies, and antipathies, and then a higher self. And it's referred to as, I refer to it as the charioteer who guides the wild horses of the astral body, our sympathies and antipathies, or our the witness, the spirit, that which makes us unique. And so I worked for years in these clinics, Timothy, where we never, ever used these psychotropic medications. And we attracted the attention of the mental health service because we cost them less money. And people were actually getting well. And we used actually homeopathy. We used diet. We used a variety of artistic therapies. People were engaged in their will, working in the gardens and so on. And then when I came back to this country, probably now about 17 or so years ago, I was, Timothy, horrified to see how quickly people were medicated. And at one point, I was working at a rehab in Vermont as the Hauschka artistic therapist there. And I had a number of young people who appreciated me because I treated them as human beings. We're human beings. We're not schizophrenics. We're not alcoholics. We're human beings struggling with alcohol or struggling with the challenges that life just simply brings. And at one point, these young people came in one by one. And actually, to be honest, I thought it was a bit of a setup. But it wasn't. But they all came in and one by one stood in front of me and said, I hate being medicated. Isn't there a choice? And I had witnessed beautiful young people coming into the rehab, not on medication in some cases. And I would witness losing them, just as their parents witnessed losing them to the side effects of these medications. And I told them, of course, there is a choice. And I mentioned different options. I mentioned Robert Whitaker's work and Mad in America, or other websites they could go to. And what happened was, eventually when they left the rehab, within 2 years of their leaving, 6 of them had taken their life. And the first one, of course, I was shocked. And then there was another one, and it was like, this is so unnecessary. There's no reason in the world they need to take their lives. Having worked in Europe, where we never medicated anybody, and we saw people thriving, working through their challenges and then thriving. And by the time the 6th one, I remember saying to my husband, I'm out of this. I can't handle this. But then I realized innocence is bliss. And you're not innocent anymore. And what I realized I had to do was simply offer a choice. Take the best of my life experiences, find colleagues. And I had met many people, well, I wouldn't say many, a few people. One who had been to Diabasis House with the work of John Weir Perry in California in the 70s, where he never medicated schizophrenics, but he helped them go through the eye of the needle, honoring their journey and honoring their spiritual experiences in that process. And so I just was getting encouragement to, okay, just start one. And so Inner Fire, actually, we're now almost 6 years old, so we're a fledgling, but we've had 30 odd people come through the program. Some of them arrive shuffling their feet and blurry-eyed, having been on medication half their life. Others are newly on medication. But the key thing is, Timothy, is that we offer a choice. We're not telling anyone to come off their medication, but we're offering a choice for people to come to us before you're medicated. Or we will honor your journey in tapering. And if you want to get all the way off with the support of a wonderful psychiatrist, we go slowly, carefully to the level that works for you. Maybe it's not quite off. Maybe it is off. Or, you know, the awful side effects of the benzodiazepines, which are dished out like candy. It's totally shocking. We've had people who have gotten off of them and are still reeling from the side effects of them after a year of being. So to come to a place where they feel safe, and the whole program really, Timothy, recognizes the human being as a whole organism. And I tell you, I would be one happy woman if one day we no longer even have the term mental health, but we're really talking about soul health. Our head is not isolated from the rest of our organism. And what happens on a deeper soul level affects our thinking. And what the sad thing is, Timothy, is, you know, these people who took their lives, and we can, if you want to look and acknowledge that the suicide rate is going up, as is the use of these psychotropic medications. And I've had remarkable people here at Inner Fire, and who I've met at conferences and so, who say, basically, it's under the influence of these psychotropic medications where they are more suicidal. Why? Because they're disconnected from their ability to think clearly. They're disconnected from their ability to have heartfelt feelings or to do something creatively. So our soul is really that part of us which is a thinker, a feeler, and a doer. And when we're disconnected from all of that, we basically are told, you have to live the life of a zombie, where you can't really do anything. And that's why people are, I believe, in my experience, why people are taking their lives. I am not prepared to live like this. I had a dear, dear cousin who lost both his parents. He was put on antidepressants, told you'd have to be on them the rest of your life, and thought he loved life. So he jumped from the Golden Gate Bridge. You know, and he and so many other people, I really felt with the loss of these 6 beautiful, young, sensitive people, that their suicide was a wake-up call, was a sacrifice, Timothy. Will we wake up? Some people I know refer to this time with the use of these psychotropic meds as a time of genocide. At least we're beginning to do something about the opioids. But what about the benzodiazepines? You know, what about but we're trapped in a system, Timothy. But how do we change the system? A doctor recently approached me, and her main clientele are suicidal psychiatrists. Look at the system. Are we just going to go along with this? So inner fire, Timothy, is, you could say it's a drop in the ocean. But having used homeopathy all my life, and my children have been brought up with it, I'd say we're a potentized drop because we're being watched from all over the world. And an email from South Africa said, even knowing inner fire exists gives us hope. You know?
So tell us a little bit more about your program there at Inner Fire. What you offer, how many people you can house.
Okay. Yeah. So I would say in the ideal world, people would stay a year because deep healing takes time. But unfortunately, the insurance companies are not on the same plane as we are. And so at this time, it's private pay. We do have a supporter seeker fund, hoping for people to donate and give young people the opportunity to come here. Maybe that their child didn't have, who knows? We can have, at the moment, we've just completed the east wing of the Inner Fire home. We've been using that for a year now, just over a year. And so we can have 9 people. We're still raising money. We're a not-for-profit. And we're also a TCR, Therapeutic Community Resident. So we're licensed in the state of Vermont as well. And eventually, when we've raised the money for the West Wing, our limit will be 12. We don't want to be, it's not a business, it's a healing community. And 12 can still be family style, you could say. And so when people are interested in coming here, we want to make sure we're all on the same page, because it's not a holiday camp. It's hard work. And one of the major things is rhythm. So everyone comes for a 3-day visit. And during that time, they get a real taste. They totally immerse themselves in the program and they get a real taste. They see that you've got to get up at 6 in order to come down for breakfast by 6:45, when you would take any medication that you're still on, or supplements and so on. Then we have breakfast at 7. We wash up at 7:30. And then we head out for a walk every morning, the same walk. Except for when we build a fire in the woods, and then we may go along other paths for our morning circle. And after the walk, which goes along a beautiful brook, and this time of year, of course, with all the ice formations, it's just exquisite, and every day very different. So we're also doing it very consciously because nature has a lot of healing to give to us. If we can learn to not watch our feet, but to look up and around. And this time of year, of course, the light is changing, and that's very heartening and exciting after our winter. Then we come back to the main house, to Gracebrook, and we have what we call a morning circle. And we go around the circle, the guides and the seekers together, and share how we're doing and what we're grateful for. And then we always sing together. And I think you'll notice, if you want to look at it in this way, everything we do has a therapeutic element to it. So we sing, which encourages deep breathing, encourages listening, encourages working together. And then the seekers go out to do something for the Inner Fire community. So I see it as the out breath. Then I go away from just my own personal needs, and I am either chopping down a tree with an axe, 2-person sawing it up, splitting the wood. And by the way, when I split wood, I don't hear voices. And that's very interesting for some people to realize I'm not a victim of my voices. But if I channel my energy deeply, focus, and I've had this in the artistic therapeutic sessions as well. So you're either outdoors this time of year in the woods, or in a couple of months' time, we'll be sowing seeds and we grow our own vegetables. We built our greenhouse all by hand. We built our chicken coop all by hand. So it's all about also, you'll notice, getting people out of their heads into their limbs. Yeah. Where so often in our society, we get stuck up in our heads. And I believe that leads to psychosis when we don't know what to do with our limbs. And we haven't, there's very little artwork or craft work or music in our schools nowadays. So, and then, so you're working in the kitchen and you're learning how to cook properly. And we cook as all organic, the best quality you can possibly get. It's lacto-fermented foods, which have to do with healing the gut. Yeah. So the gut health is very much taken into account. We have no sugar. And then there's house cleaning and cleaning using biodegradable cleansers. So we're really preparing someone in the mornings to be able to go back out into the world when they leave and are fire empowered, knowing how to clean, knowing how to cook, knowing how to garden, knowing how to split wood, and of course in the morning, that's also when you become aware of, can I help you wield this wheelbarrow? Can I help do this or that? So you're supporting each other and seeing what needs to be done for the broader community. And then at 12 o'clock, we have lunch. At 12:30, we're washing up. And then the seekers go up to their rooms where they then receive a liver compress. So the liver is our organ that deals with the poisons in our body, and it's been taxed for most of us just by living in the culture we live in, but certainly with the psychotropic meds and the other substances one may have used. And then after that, but that's basically time out. So you go to your own space, you interact with nobody, and maybe you sleep, or maybe you rest or read or so. And then after lunch is when one engages in the one-on-one therapy. So that can be seen, Timothy, as the in-breath. You come into yourself. And 3 days of the week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the artistic therapies are engaged. One engages in them. And they come in blocks. So we have someone who comes from Holland to work with music therapy. We have eurythmy therapy, which is a form of movement or spatial dynamics or yoga. We have somatic breath work. We have massage. We have speech arts at different times during the year. And then 2 days of the week, we have more counseling work. And these are people who come from a variety of different therapeutic counseling, family systems, and so on, and so that's basically what the afternoon would look like. And then there's also some free time in the afternoon. And then we have supper at 6 o'clock. And then in the evenings, we have different activities. And that's also where we come together as peers. And it could be appreciation, where you go around the circle and you share what you appreciate about everyone in the circle. And then, of course, yourself, which is always the hardest for, I think, every one of us. Or where you sharing a question that's been living in your heart for a long time. And finally, there's a group where you can give the context of it and shape it into a question, which means you're interested in listening. People also Tuesday nights carving spoons or doing some other craft work out of wood that you've harvested from the woods. And singing on a Thursday night. And there's drumming as well. And so basically music in different ways. And then Wednesday is an early evening where you do your laundry or you tidy your room or so. And then on weekends, you practice the cooking you've learned. We have the Putney Mountain Range right in our front yard. And so there are hikes up there and snowshoeing or not cross-country skiing, but it could be cross-country skiing. And swimming in the rivers nearby. So it's a very full day. But if we're really, maybe I could give Timothy this picture of the soul breath. And I'd say it's a layman's picture, but I think almost everyone would understand this. Is when I say the in-breath, I'm thinking of an experience where, for instance, let's say some young person or any one of us sees something that's really terrible, awful to see. And we have this, this experience of, it's awful. And I'm afraid, and I get stuck in that soul gesture. I'm afraid of breathing out because I might fall apart. I don't know what I would do. Yeah. Or the other extreme is, let's say I was sexually abused, Timothy. Like any one of us, I would be as far out of this body as I could get. And of course, if I lose my center by doing so, getting away from this body of pain, I am going to hear voices because I've lost my center. I'm way out there. And so, for instance, we're always working with this soul breath. And for instance, I can just explain with the artistic therapeutic work. Maybe I go back to this for a moment, because the classroom is a beautiful example. So we all know, particularly I was a teacher once as well, but the teacher may be tempted to bring the child who's, so to speak, all over the place to the front row, where they're under the illusion the child will be able to focus better. Well, this child actually probably doesn't even have to turn around to know what's happening 4 rows back. Yeah. Or you have the child who's sitting in the middle of the classroom, and let's say all hell is breaking loose around them, but they are so centered. They're oblivious of what's going on. So you have one extreme or the other, and I'd like to invite us all to imagine, where am I on that spectrum? Because every one of us is either more centered or more loose, more living in the periphery or more in the center. And so taking those pictures, carrying those pictures with you to imagine, so for instance, in the artistic therapeutic work, which everyone does, but everyone is treated as an individual because everyone is somewhere in that spectrum. So if I had someone who was way out there, hearing voices, so to speak, the last thing I would do is watercolor with them. Watercolor is loosening. The water is loosening. It's a living element, and you have to work with it. And typically, if I were to work with someone in that state of soul, probably the water would be spilling all over the place. It would be far too loose. But I would invite that person to work with clay, which is a way. You can't do the clay unless you bring your consciousness into your fingertips. So it's a natural way of inviting someone to come in. And, even making a sphere for some people to begin with, where you're not allowed to roll it, of course, you have to use your thumbs, your fingers to work together, can take weeks. That's the state of soul they might be in. Or someone who's very stuck too caught, then the watercolor comes into its own. You have the beautiful luminosity of the colors, which feed the soul. And then you have the dynamic of the water, which keeps you a bit on your toes. You have to pay attention. You have to be a bit more alert. And then you have the whole spectrum in between of the pastel, which is color but tactile, or the charcoal, which is no color, but you're working with the elements of light and dark, and so on. And you'd find all of the therapies that are offered here, or the majority, I would say, recognize the human being as being fourfold, or as having body, soul, and spirit, as I said. And so we're always working on balancing the soul of the individual. And then, so I think that, and then the counseling work has its own beauty to it as well.
Wonderful. Well, it's a very rich and diverse experience as you're describing it, which, is one of the things that many people are finding functional medicine as a basically a new approach to helping people recognize. Is you have to look at all these various aspects of the human, the community, the purpose in life, a sense of love, a sense of connection to community. It's just great to hear that you're doing that at Inner Fire. What's the, you said, I believe you said you have a capacity for just 9 people at this point?
At the moment now, 9. And then eventually we'll have 12. But I have been asked to start an inner fire in Texas, Northern California, Michigan, and the UK. But we have more work to do here before that happens. And I would say that, we recognize people here at Inner Fire as creators and not victims. And I'd love to give you this short little vignette Timothy, for many years, I worked in prisons in New York State, maximum security and medium. And in the maximum security, I brought alternatives to violence. And I loved going in and meeting these remarkable human beings. And I used to say, I love coming in and all of you want to get out, but I'm really glad to come in and to work with you. And then in one prison, I was painting with men. And really the watercolor painting we do has all really to do with our social life. And there was one day when a young man came up to me. His name was Ian. He was about 28, beautiful young man. He had been painting with me for a while. And he said, I was trying to write to a friend on the outside about this art class. And he said, it's so hard to describe what happens here. Eventually I wrote to my friend, it's an art class, but it's really a spiritual class. And then he looked me straight in the eyes and he said, this is what I was looking for on the outside. Isn't it strange I had to come to prison to find it? And I thought, you're all seekers. You're all looking for something more than this fast-paced, superficial, materialistic life, And so as Inner Fire was being formed, I remember saying to my husband, but what are we going to call the people who come here? And not that I really want to call anybody anything in particular, but I thought I'm not going to call them clients or patients or residents. And then I thought of Ian, and I thought, we'll call them seekers, because it's respectful. And anyone who comes to Inner Fire is looking for something more than what's being dished out,
Oh, it's respectful and it's descriptive.
And it's a verb. And it's a noun, but it has a verb connotations, yeah. And so I remember one young man in our first year coming in and sitting down and, introducing himself. Well, I'm schizoid affective and this and this. And I listened to him and I said, I'm not really interested in your label. I'm much more interested in who you are. And in fact, we call people here at Inner Fire seekers. And there was this flash of light in his eye. And it was almost like, really? Well, okay, then I'm a seeker, And in the same sense, Timothy, we who work here, we don't refer to ourselves as staff, but as guides. And I'd say we're guides the way a midwife is a guide to someone giving birth. And our seekers, after their mothers giving them their physical birth, they are now rebirthing themselves. And that's why to get off these meds, it is hard work and it is so courageous. And another image came to me once of the way the banks of a river guide the current. We don't block the current, but we guide it. And at times in the tapering process, the banks have to come closer together and hold the person so they can continue to go forward. If we were to crumble and just let the seeker do whatever they wanted to do and spin out, we've lost them. It is so hard once someone is out there. We can do it, and but to pull them back in, to help them not lose this center in their journey of tapering. And so we also have a anger is okay policy, because I see anger as actually blocked creative energy. It's energy that should be flowing, but for one reason or another, it's been blocked. And it dams up, and eventually it bursts out. So anger is part of the tapering process. So we say we have a anger is okay policy, but violence is unacceptable. But we also have experienced that violence is part of a tapering process. And so we have to be careful. We have to know when enough. We can't do any more here. But I would say we probably go more through the eye of the needle than a lot of places, and it's no good to compare. But we see that. And so we can have someone, for instance, not so long ago, was hysterically laughing for 3 hours. We sat with them. And after the 3 hours, suddenly he was fine. He said, I want to take a shower. And the next day, another wave of the tapering process happened, you know? So we do not send the person to the hospital as soon as something that's uncomfortable happens. And so, you know, really in our application form to work at Inner Fire, it has been softened a little bit. But initially what I wrote in the first applications was, to work at Inner Fire is a path of self-knowledge and self-development. It's not a job. If you're looking for a job, go elsewhere. You know, because we actually, it's not ethical to ask anything of a seeker that we're not working on ourselves. And the seekers are going to show us our weaknesses. Yeah. And we have to be grateful for that. And they're a wake-up call to us. We have to get our act together. We have to become more conscious in order to help the individuals who come here, who seek rebirth, who seek to reclaim their lives. Yeah.
So what I hear in what you're saying is that you bring a profound depth of experience and commitment to this work that is going to provide a firm, loving structure for people to go through what they need to go through to actually discover themselves and what they need to do to be more productive, more content in their life, more joyful. And, you know, my experience, having worked in a variety of correctional facilities and psychiatric hospitals and residential facilities, is that it takes a tremendous depth and breadth of commitment and experience to do that well. And it sounds like in this very short time you're talking to me, I can hear you've got the components for that. And I can also understand why you wouldn't want to rush off and do 3 or 4 more facilities. Because
step by step. Yeah.
Right. And to do it with that, you know, that quality of follow through and making sure. I'm so glad you're talking about the people who are working there, at least beginning with the knowledge that they're going to have to be working on themselves. You can't help someone through a deep crisis without having your unresolved issues shown to you.
Yeah.
And
I can give an example, Timothy, if you'd like. I remember one day, one of our guides in our early days was frightened by something one of the seekers did. And she said to me, he's got to go. He has to leave. Essentially, I was frightened. He did something that really scared me. I was frightened. He has to go. Now, I had just beforehand, a week or so beforehand, taken with another colleague, another guide, we'd gone on a canoe trip for a week. That's a passion of mine, is whitewater canoeing. I used to take inner city youth whitewater canoeing up in Canada, and I totally love it. And on that trip, I had happened, when we were pulling the canoe up onto shore, I happened to ask him, where would you be if you were not at Inner Fire? And he didn't even hesitate. He said, dead. And so when this guide, who's a wonderful person, but she had been frightened, mentioned this to me, you know, that he must go, I told her, I said to her, for you, it's a job. For him, it's his life, you know? And for instance, if somebody shouts very loudly at any of us, and let's say I had a father who shouted, who was abusive and verbally abusive and so on, and I never really knew how to work with that, so I just would push it down, suppress it. And life has been okay until I work at Inner Fire, or I work at some other place where a seeker comes up and tells me to F off and do whatever, so, you know, right in my face. He's really shouting as part of his tapering process or so. And that triggers my memory of my father. Do you see? So he's actually showing me, honey, I've got work to do. I have to digest what I've been avoiding all these years, you know? And so that's what we try to work with. I try to work with our guides, because, you know, in so many families, you're not allowed to be angry. And that's one of the first emotions expressed in the tapering process. And I see people holding themselves together. And it's like, no, claim your anger, acknowledge it, free it, and redirect that creative energy, you know? So at Inner Fire, you're also allowed, you know, I remind people, men and women, we all have tear ducts. We have them for a reason. And to be able to cry and cry and cry and sob, and I think it's a whole load of rubbish that you know, if you cry for over a certain number of weeks now, you're depressed and you're meant to be medicated. I tell you, if anyone told me there's a limit to how much crying I should do, I tell them where to get off, you know? And it's like, I'm going to cry until I don't need to cry anymore. And that's fine, you know? And, you know, and so you're allowed to cry, you're allowed to really laugh. There's a lot of humor here. And basically, you can talk about anything at Inner Fire. And many people say it's the first place they've ever felt safe, you know? So it's a journey. And, but as I said, you know, you're not pitied when you come to Inner Fire. I mean, people's stories, I've teared up in front of seekers and in other rehab, where I remember one young man was telling me his story and I could feel the tears rising. And I, of course, had this dilemma going on inside me. I'm a professional, I shouldn't be crying. And I thought, his story is so moving. How can I listen to it and not cry? You know, and he paused and he said, are you crying? You know, the tears were in my eyes. They weren't yet falling down my cheeks, you know. And I said to him, well, I guess I am, you know. And he said, but why are you crying? And I said, just listening to your story is so moving, you know. And so he saw me. Now, I can't dissolve in tears with every single person's story. There must be some balance in this. But, you know, for him, he saw his life from another perspective, that it was tough. It is tough. But still, the question is, what are you going to do about it? Because we're not victims. And maybe maybe the individual needs to speak up, claim his or her voice, you know, and see the challenges that we meet in life as opportunities for growth.
Well,
because, yeah.
One of the things that I have gotten a lot of benefit from myself and people I work with is I suggest that when they hear themselves thinking or speaking with the word victim, I was a victim of the economic downturn, I was a victim of sexual abuse, I was a victim of beatings as a child, that if they just try this on, breathe, soften, and substitute the phrase, I experienced the economic downturn, I experienced physical abuse, I experienced this rape. The change in language and positioning tends to be very empowering to people.
Yeah. It's so true. It's so true. And I think, you know, for people, you know, Timothy, what I feel is anyone who goes to you, it's not by chance they go to you. Anyone who comes to Inner Fire, it's not coincidence they come to Inner Fire. And so we need to, and anyone else who's out there listening to this, if you can see that challenges are opportunities for growth, we need to encourage the individuals to take on the challenge, because they're seeking, you know, it's like this young man, Ian, they're looking for something more. Is there anything in me that can heal and overcome these challenges? And, you know, I remember as a child reading so many stories about people in concentration camps and in these really challenging situations. And my question was, well, why do some people survive and others don't? It's not a judgment call, but I thought there must be something within the individual who made them even in such awful, awful situations. And that's happening today all the time, who are creators and can work with this as a challenge, you know?
Well, there's Viktor Frankl's work,
Yeah.
Man's Search for Meaning, that book.
Yeah.
And there's an answer to your question. Why is it that some people seem to survive or thrive in some of those horrible settings? And one of his understandings about it was that he had found a meaning, that he held to his values, and it carried him through.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just looked at the time, and time flies in interviews like this. Thank you for doing this. But I wanted to give you a chance to talk about how you get the money for your program. How can people support you if they're interested? How can people find out more about Inner Fire if they want to be a seeker?
Thank you. Thank you, Timothy. Yeah. At the moment, we're raising, with only $300,000, we would be able to build the Arts and Drama Barn. And this is the next thing we want to build, because first of all, we need more space to meet as a community of people at Inner Fire. But secondly, there's not a single parent who comes, or spouse who comes to Inner Fire, who has not said to me, I need Inner Fire. They're exhausted. They're angry, they're confused. And I can see this Arts and Drama Barn as being a place for a retreat for parents 4 times a year. And the seekers, many of the seekers would like to have their parents come and split wood alongside them. And I would love to offer the parents the therapies that we offer here, to experience, to feed them and to nourish them in this incredibly challenging journey that they've gone through with their offspring or their loved one. Yeah. So, and then also with this conversation with the doctor from further west, whose main clientele are suicidal psychiatrists, it's like, well, we could have retreats for psychiatrists where they could learn, they could see another healing modality in action at Inner Fire. They could look out and see that person splitting wood and not hearing voices. They're getting out of their heads into their limbs. And we have other psychiatrists who could certainly come and teach and support the psychiatrists to earn their living by helping people come off these psychotropic meds. So there's this community aspect. But for just over $1 million now, we could complete the West Wing. And in the West Wing, I'm not quite sure how we're going to do this. I'm not quite sure if it's going to be legal, but I have to explore this. I would really prefer to not ever send anybody to the hospital from Inner Fire. We've had 3 times when the violence has gotten too extreme. But then they go to the hospital, they're hoiked up and down on medication, the food is full of sugar, they don't get outside for any fresh air, they sit around totally in their heads. And I don't see any healing going on in these hospitals. So what I'd like to be able to do is create what Dr. John Weir Perry did at his dialysis house in California, was a mattress room, where voluntarily an individual who's going through a crisis, and they can go through it and come out the other side, can go to this mattress room where they will not hurt themselves and they cannot hurt anybody else. So that's another thing. And so we need the West Wing of the Inner Fire home, and then the main part of the building. And then eventually we'll have therapeutic huts dotted here and there over the 43 acres, where the seekers would walk through the woods along trails they have created to have their music therapy or their speech arts or their movement of some kind or other. So we desperately need support to finish the building of this. So any donations would be so gratefully received. And then we also have a support a seeker fund, because actually for Inner Fire to be what it needs to be, It has to be available for people regardless of their financial situation, regardless of their race, religion, sexual identity, regardless of their financial situation. And there are plenty of people out in the world who have money. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have enough in our supporter seeker fund that we could have, 3 or 4 people come through the program who otherwise would never be able to afford it. And in the meantime, I am working with the Department of Mental Health here in Vermont, who are very interested in Inner Fire. And I'm hoping they'll use this as a pilot project. Because if you talk financially, the seekers will be off their medication, off their disability, reclaiming their lives, one-day tax-paying citizens, and we're less than a third of what is paid a day through the insurance companies and the department. So it makes sense. And we also expect people to get well, Timothy. Yeah. And it's not easy. It's hard work,
So how is do you have an active fundraising program? Is there, I want to make sure that you say in this interview, the website.
Sure. Yes.
And we'll have that attached in the blog
Yeah.
and things, of course, we'll promote that. But what's the website and what's any ongoing programs you have for raising funds?
Yeah. So the website is www.innerfire, lowercase, one word, .us, innerfire.us. And we have grant writers and we're fundraising really all the time. I have raised over $1 million to have all the utilities and everything brought up to the East Wing. Yeah. And I think that's, and we have an annual appeal and we have a newsletter. So anybody who is interested in being on our mailing list, certainly contact me. And the phone number is also 802-221-8051. So innerfire.us. And
would you say that one again?
Yeah,
phone number.
Okay, 802-221-8051.
Wonderful. And innerfire.us.
That's it, Timothy. Yeah.
And if somebody tunes into this or is referred to this talk and they have an urge to come be a guide, it's all the same contact information?
Yes, it is. Yep. And someone who's, it's interesting because you have to have a certain relationship to fear. And I'll tell you also, with every single seeker who's been here, they show us a lot of astrality, a lot of fire and craziness and all this sort of thing. That's totally fine. But there are moments when they show us the curtains are drawn and they show us who they really are. And we never let go of that. So you can go through all this other stuff and you hold on to who they really are. And I would say, Timothy, an active ingredient at Inner Fire is love. And I don't say that sentimentally. Love is actually a force. And it's something that really guides our work and helps us go through the eye of the needle. Once we've seen who that person essentially is, we don't let go of it. And for a while, we're the ones who will believe you can heal. And then eventually, as you begin to believe you can heal, we sort of step back more and more. So you become more and more empowered. And I think healing, you could just say, is, because people have asked me, well, what's healing? How do you know when someone's ready to go? And I would say when the individual has connected with what I call the divine creative self within them, it's within every one of us. When they've connected with that, then they know I can work with any challenge that comes my way. I may not like it. I might think, oh, bloody hell, here this is again, but I can do it. And that means I can find people who can help me too. But it's important because we don't fix people. People are broken. So I can't promise, and you can have the best program in the world. And if somebody suddenly says, I've had enough, and I should also say, Timothy, I would say typically if you've been on medication for a long time, we really encourage a year. But if you've worked through so much, if you're really ready and you've worked through so much within 6 months, we don't hold you. We're not a locked facility, you know. We encourage you to stay engaged during this process. And the program is so comprehensive that you definitely could leave identifying with a whole nother part of yourself. Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the things in what you're saying is that it's a big part of my work with people is trying to give them tools.
Yeah.
And those tools are, they're carry-ons. They take them with them wherever they go. And there's a whole set of tools that I've been working with for a number of years now. It's part of a support group I've taught for 15 and a half years and a podcast we've done for 9 years. I'm going to make sure and get you access to some of those tools to see how, because they're made available absolutely free from Dr. Michael Rice and whyagain.org, WHYAGAIN.org, and they may be very compatible with some of the work you've done. Certainly the underlying assumption of the personality, the soul, the mind, the energy, the purpose in life is very compatible.
Great.
And,
and there's one term, Timothy, that some of us might have heard in the mental health world. I'd say it's a disgusting term, which is to maintain. That seems to be the best this medical model will do, is to maintain people, maintain them. I say you maintain tractors and trucks, Timothy. We help to heal human beings. Yeah. And I think nobody should take that term sitting down. That's a very, very dangerous term. And when nowadays where artificial intelligence is coming more and more in, and robots are replacing human beings in nursing homes, it's like, really, what are we doing? And also to see healthy children are asked to sit behind a desk for 6 hours a day. And in some schools, there's no recess. In some schools, there's no window in the classrooms. Childhood is all about action, movement, dynamic. And then a healthy child is blamed for being ADD. Are you kidding? So children are our barometers. We have to really look. We have a huge task ahead of us, really.
And some really good tools for helping people do what some of us are calling moving toward optimal health and well-being.
Exactly. Beautiful. Yeah.
And there's no limit on that. It's lovely to find out more about what you do, and I'm looking forward to our next contact. I would anticipate that in about a year, I'm going to ask you for another interview, and we can get an update on Inner Fire and the progress of fundraising. And
maybe you'll even come visit.
I've had that thought. I've had that thought.
Good.
Delightful to be with you. Thank you so much for your time, Beatrice, and the best of everything to you. Blessings for all of your seekers and all of your guides.
And thank you very much, Timothy, too, and for your work and for all that Journey's Dream can help to tap into and unfold. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you. Blessings.
Bye. Thank you.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.